Can you walk us through? All right, so men and women, everyone who's pursuing friendship, what does the habit of vulnerability look like in covenant friendships? If you had something to add before, I might have kind of cut you off, but
No.
yeah,
Actually,
go ahead.
I was going to launch right into vulnerability because, you're talking about it's possible for men, and I do think that men are more prone to this, though it's very possible for women too,
Yeah,
um, to live next to other people, sharing common interests, sharing common experience, but never actually truly knowing each other. And so each of the chapters in this book I base on art and habit. Um, and the art is the idea. Let's take vulnerability for an example. Is that relationships are unique. I could not credibly, even though I love, as you know, Aaron, writing about habits, I couldn't credibly claim that friendship is at core a habit. It's
Mhm.
habits lead to it. It also is a lot art because it's relationship. So the art here is vulnerability, and the habit is confession. And that practice of confession, I think, is what leads us to living lives of vulnerability. Now, let's just put it in practice, right? Um, what I suggest is that people look for a couple relationships around them right now and ask themselves how can they move towards greater vulnerability and transparency in them, because all this talk about covenant friendship might make people feel like, well, look, I don't have like decades long friends from high school, I just moved to a new area, or I'm older, maybe you're an empty nester, you don't have time to do this. I'm suggesting, no, this is something that you can do right now wherever you are with just one or a couple friends, and that is go deeper into a transparent life. And the way that this looks for me and my two best friends named Matt and Steve. Steve, you'll remember from the high school story. We're still trucking. We get together every other Tuesday night on one of our front porches. We're recording on a Wednesday. Actually, just did this last night, and we just talk. It is nothing fancy. I mean, we could be senior citizens meeting at McDonald's. We could be young 20-year-olds meeting at a coffee shop. Right now, we're in our mid to late 30s hanging out on our front porch. It's just the idea of coming together regularly, not just to run or lift weights or to play chess or to play Call of Duty or something. We do a lot of shared activities. But one of the habits is that we, at least every other week, turn to deep conversation and ask hard questions that are not complicated. They're just real ones. Like, how are you doing in your marriage? How are you doing with your kids? How's your mental health given the blank things you're experiencing? What does your internet history look like? What are you worried about? How are your finances? These things that are actually not even really structured because we've been working on this for a while. They're just natural turns towards saying what's going on in your inner life, where
yeah,
we're inviting each other to be like Christ, and that is make known everything, become vulnerable, which actually the Latin root of that means to be capable of being wounded. Because when we tell our secrets, when we tell our deepest stuff, we're literally giving our friends the weapons with which to hurt us. They could go tell the world and we're doomed, right?
yeah,
But what actually happens when you pair vulnerability with commitment is I experience with Matt and Steve an embodiment of Jesus's love for me. That I hear somebody else know me and hear all my mistakes and hear all my shame, and they say, I love you and Christ love you. Like you're good even in the midst of your failure. And it's like every other week when I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I needed that. I needed that reenactment of the gospel through this simple habit of talking. I mean, I can call it
yeah,
confession. You can call it vulnerability, but it's also just called honest conversation with friends. But when we go to that level, which can be made a habit, it can be a regular meeting time with that small group or accountability group or front porch group, whatever it is, that can be made a habit. And suddenly you have the habit of embodying the gospel to each other on a regular basis. And that is what I call the art of vulnerability. And honestly, Aaron, it will set you free. I mean,
yeah.
we need this because otherwise we all end up people living with secrets, and secrets will eat us alive.
Mm, yeah, that's so good. I think that um, so as a guy talking to the guys in the audience out there,
Mm,
I think that I don't want to. I think that we often in the church think that there's like uh, a it's mutually exclusive. You can either do the activities or you can have the vulnerability. right? So that's why we
Hmm.
have so many ineffective men's ministries in churches, because either on the one hand, all they do is go out and like throw footballs and barbecue, or they say, hey guys, would y'all like to sit in a circle and open up to each other? And no one wants to do that. you know, I think that the key, and so this is something I've experienced like in my personal friendships, and then now also in our new men's ministry of the church, which is just going really great so far. The key is to do both, because I think
Yes.
guys get to that place of vulnerability whenever we do things together. I think it's just how
Yes.
God made us. He made us to like enjoy working on something, or to do
Right.
an activity,
Right.
solve a problem, overcome an
Yes.
obstacle. And so yeah, just as a guy speaking to the guys out there, um, figure out a way to do both, because
I
doing the
completely agree.
struggle, the competition, the game, the cooking, whatever else it is, do it together, and then like it works in our hearts to make us softer with each other. You know?
I couldn't agree with that more. And my practical advice um, on this is just add a coffee like after the run, or add like a beer after the football game. Something where you allow room for conversation before or after the shared activity, because
Hmm.
I do strongly agree. Vulnerability doesn't just come out of thin air. You need shared life experience in the beginning of shared trust, and often for men, that shared activity becomes the foundation for that. But I just, alongside you, Aaron, encourage people, don't leave it at shared activity. That's
Yeah.
companionship. Okay, you can have a ton of companions. That's a network. That's colleagues. Friendship is where you turn to each other and actually share your interior life. And so practicing making that turn from talking about fantasy football to talking about how is your marriage going, that is an art and a habit that can and must be practiced. And it starts with just making room for conversation before or after the shared activity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good, because that is, I think, another temptation for a lot of guys, me included. You were definitely speaking to me right there. Is to skip the second part, you know.
Yes.
And so yeah, you got to be disciplined, and that's good.
And
I want to.
wait, so
Yeah,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
jump in and share one more thing here, because
Yeah.
it's something my friend Matt, who I'd mentioned, shared last night, and I thought it was so important. Um, he was sharing that he thinks friendships matter so much in his life because when he's spending time in friendship, he's either laughing really hard or sharing about really hard stuff. And both of those are incredibly cathartic, mentally healthy, and spiritually. Just to experience joy and shared experience, because it's not all vulnerability and talking about deep stuff. It's also laughing really hard at jokes that people would think are inappropriate if I said them out loud on this podcast. I mean, we have real friends with like real humor, and everybody does. And part of
Yeah.
it is just being real people with each other and cracking up about something that doesn't matter and that nobody else would think is funny. And then it's
Yeah.
also that, sharing about hard things. And I thought that's a wonderful way of putting it, because moving back and forth from the common interests, things you can laugh about or, have fun over, to the common vulnerability, that's the good life. And that's why, and Matt was just naming it last night, and I couldn't agree more.